Pay attention to the man in this photograph. His name is Eduardo Valseca. He is 50 years old, and in this picture, he is smiling. A slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes that suggests this is a frequent and genuine expression. He is standing in his workshop, a place of sawdust and creativity, holding a piece of half-finished furniture. It is a moment of simple, quiet pride. Now look closer at the date embedded in the digital file of this photograph. August 27th, 2019. It is approximately 7 in the evening. The sun is setting over the rugged landscape of Tijeras, New Mexico, casting long shadows from the juniper and piñon trees that dot his property. He does not know it, but this is one of the last pictures that will ever be taken of him. In 6 hours, he will be fighting for his life. In 7, he will be dead. This is not simply a story of a life cut short. This is the story of how the very air in a room, the invisible waves of data and sound, can become the most crucial witness to a crime. It is a story about a killer who believed they were smarter than technology, smarter than the police, and smarter than the person who loved them. They were wrong. Eduardo Valseca was, by all accounts, a profoundly good man. The kind of man who defines a community through quiet acts of kindness rather than grand gestures. He had moved to the rural quiet of New Mexico seeking peace, a place where he could work with his hands and raise his son in an environment free from the noise of a big city. His friends and family described him as gentle, almost to a fault. He was a craftsman, a cabinet maker, whose skill was born from a deep patience and an appreciation for detail. He saw the potential in a raw block of wood, the grain, the character, and he could coax it into something beautiful and functional. That same patience extended to people. He was a listener, the kind of person you could call in the middle of the night, and he would not only answer, but would also make you feel like your problem was the only thing that mattered in the world. His greatest joy was his son, a teenager who was the center of his universe. He taught the boy how to fish, how to identify constellations in the clear desert sky, and how to use the tools in his workshop. He was building not just furniture, but a legacy of gentle strength and self-reliance for his child. He was a father in the truest sense of the word, present and engaged. His love a constant, steady force in his son's life. But even the kindest men have their struggles. Eduardo's life had its own imperfections, its own raw edges. His recent years had been marked by a search for companionship, a desire to share the quiet life he had built. That search had led him to Sarah Hartsfield. On the surface, she seemed to be everything he was looking for. She was an Army veteran, a trained medic, which gave her an air of competence and capability. She spoke of discipline, of service, of a structured life that seemed to complement his own more artistic and free-flowing nature. She was a mother herself, and they bonded over shared stories of parenthood, of the hopes and fears that come with raising children. To his friends, she was a bit of an enigma, but they trusted Eduardo's judgment. If he saw something good in her, they were prepared to see it too. She was polite, if a little reserved. She could be charming when she wanted to be, telling stories from her time in the military that were both impressive and entertaining. She presented herself as a woman who had overcome hardship, a survivor who was now ready to build a peaceful future. Eduardo, with his open heart, believed her. He saw a partner, someone to share the quiet sunsets with, someone to build a life alongside. He was a man who looked for the best in people, and in Sarah, he thought he had found it. But what you are looking at when you see Sarah Hartsfield's public face is a meticulously crafted mask. It is a facade built over years of practice, a performance designed to inspire trust and disarm suspicion. Beneath that surface of the capable veteran and loving partner was a darkness that few people ever saw, and those who did rarely had the chance to warn anyone else. Sarah Hartsfield's life was a trail of broken relationships and suspicious circumstances. Before Eduardo, there had been other men, many other men, and a startling number of those relationships had ended in chaos, allegations of abuse, and, in at least one other instance, a mysterious death that had been written off as a tragic accident. She was a financial chameleon, constantly in debt, but always managing to find someone new to support her. She moved from state to state, from man to man, leaving a wake of confusion and financial ruin. She had a history of filing insurance claims, of collecting payouts after sudden and unexpected tragedies befell those closest to her. Investigators would later uncover a chilling pattern. She sought out men who were kind, stable, and often financially secure. Men like Eduardo. She would embed herself in their lives, learning their routines, their finances, their vulnerabilities. She was a predator who studied her prey with cold, calculating precision. Paragraphs dash paragraphs. Her past was a gallery of red flags that, seen in isolation, might seem like simple misfortune. A former husband who died of a supposed heart condition, leaving her with a life insurance policy. Another partner who accused her of poisoning him, an allegation that was dismissed for lack of evidence. A history of restraining orders filed against her, and by her, creating a confusing paper trail of victimhood that she expertly manipulated. She was a master of portraying herself as the wronged party. In her telling, she was the one who was unlucky in love, the one who was always being taken advantage of. She used her military service as a shield, a cloak of honor that made it difficult for people to question her integrity. Who would suspect a decorated medic of harboring such malevolent intent? This was the woman who now shared Eduardo Valseca's home. This was the person he trusted with his life, with his son, with his future. He saw a fellow traveler seeking peace. He had no idea he was sleeping next to a monster. The evening of August 27th, 2019, began with a deceptive quiet. The day had been ordinary. Eduardo spent time in his workshop, the familiar scent of cedar and pine filling the air. Sarah had run errands. They had dinner together, the simple, domestic rhythm of a couple settling in for the night. Later, they retired to the bedroom. It was a space that should have been a sanctuary. In the corner, a small cylindrical smart speaker, an Amazon Alexa, sat on a nightstand, its blue light occasionally pulsing in the darkness. On a dresser opposite the bed, a small home security camera was positioned, ostensibly to keep an eye on the pets. These two pieces of technology, designed for convenience and security, were about to become the silent, impartial chroniclers of a betrayal. Eduardo, who suffered from sleep apnea, prepared for bed. He was tired. The physical work of his trade was demanding, and he looked forward to a night of rest. Sarah was with him. Her movements were calm, her demeanor normal. There was no argument, no sign of the violence that was about to erupt. This lack of conflict is perhaps the most chilling part of the timeline. The attack on Eduardo Valseca was not a crime of passion. It was not a spontaneous explosion of rage. It was an execution. Sometime after 1 a.m., in the stillness of the New Mexico night, Sarah Hartsfield made her move. Eduardo was asleep, or perhaps just drifting off at his most vulnerable. The weapon she chose was not a gun or a knife, instruments of obvious violence that would leave undeniable evidence. Her weapon was far more insidious. As a former medic, she had specialized knowledge. She knew about drugs, about their effects on the human body, about how to administer them. She chose insulin, a massive, lethal dose. It was a cruel and calculated choice. An overdose of insulin would send the body into hypoglycemic shock, mimicking the symptoms of a seizure or a stroke. It was a medical emergency that, to an untrained eye, would look like a natural, if tragic, event. But Eduardo did not go quietly. He woke up. There was a struggle. It was a desperate, muffled fight for life in the dark bedroom. He was confused, his body already beginning to betray him as the poison coursed through his veins. He fought back against the person he trusted, the person he loved. And the Alexa heard it all. The device, designed to respond to a wake word, was activated by the sounds of the struggle. It began to record. It captured the sounds of movement, the thuds of bodies hitting the floor, the strained, desperate gasps for air from Eduardo. It captured his groans of pain. And it captured Sarah's voice, not screaming in fear or calling for help, but cold, commanding, and cruel. Then, amidst the chaos, a phrase was uttered with enough clarity to trigger the device's emergency function. Perhaps it was Eduardo crying out, "Help me," or something that sounded like, "Call 911." The specific trigger phrase was never publicly released, but the machine did what it was designed to do. It called for help. Sarah's cover-up began the moment Eduardo's struggle ended. She did not call 911. She did not rush to his side to perform first aid, despite her medical training. Instead, her first priority was to manage the scene. The security camera on the dresser recorded her movements. It showed her calmly moving around the room, cleaning, wiping surfaces, adjusting the bedding. She was erasing the evidence of a fight. She was staging the scene to look like a medical crisis. The camera captured her looking at Eduardo's motionless body, not with panic, but with a chilling patience. She was waiting for the insulin to finish its deadly work, waiting for the right amount of time to pass before she could feign a panicked discovery. Her plan was meticulous. She would claim she woke up to find him having a seizure. Her medic training would lend credibility to her story. It would be a tragedy, yes, but a natural one. And she would be the grieving girlfriend. But she had not accounted for the silent witness on the nightstand. She had no idea that her carefully constructed narrative was already being dismantled by a 911 dispatcher miles away, listening to the horrifying, garbled sounds of a murder in progress. The 911 call that came into the Bernalillo County Dispatch Center was not from a person. It was an automated alert from an Amazon device. The dispatcher who took the call was met with a confusing, disturbing audio feed. There was no one on the line speaking directly to them. Instead, they could hear muffled sounds, a man groaning, and a woman's voice speaking in low, indistinct tones. It was the kind of call that could have been easily dismissed as a pocket dial or a technical glitch. But something in the sounds, a sense of genuine distress, prompted the dispatcher to act. They traced the signal to Eduardo Valseca's address in Tijeras and dispatched sheriff's deputies for a welfare check. It was a decision that would change everything. When deputies arrived at the quiet remote home, the scene was calm. The lights were on. There were no signs of a break-in or a disturbance. They knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it was opened by Sarah Hartsfield. She appeared flustered, but not panicked. She explained to the deputies that her boyfriend, Eduardo, had just had a terrible medical episode. She said she woke up to find him convulsing, and that he had a history of health problems. Her story was plausible. Her demeanor, that of a concerned partner, was convincing. She was playing her part perfectly. Paramedics were already on their way, summoned by the deputies. When they arrived, they found Eduardo unconscious and unresponsive. His vital signs were critical. Based on Sarah's report, they began treating him for a seizure or a similar neurological event. He was rushed to the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque, with Sarah following close behind, the image of worried devotion. At this point, law enforcement had no reason to suspect foul play. It appeared to be a tragic medical emergency. The deputies cleared the scene, and for a few hours, it seemed as though Sarah Hartsfield's plan had worked. The first crack in her story appeared in the sterile, brightly lit environment of the hospital emergency room. The doctors and nurses fighting to save Eduardo's life were working against a clock, but they were also gathering information, and the information they were getting was not adding up. Eduardo's symptoms were severe, but they were not consistent with a typical seizure. His blood sugar levels were catastrophically low, a condition that can cause seizure-like activity, but is not the same thing. The medical team ran a battery of tests, trying to find the underlying cause. As they examined him, a doctor noticed something small, something that could have been easily overlooked. A tiny, almost imperceptible puncture mark on his body. It was the kind of mark left by a hypodermic needle. This discovery was the breakthrough. It shifted the entire context of the situation. This was no longer just a medical mystery. It was now a potential crime scene. The hospital staff immediately contacted the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. The investigation, which had been a simple welfare check, was now a full-blown criminal inquiry. Detectives were dispatched to the hospital and back to the house. Their first order of business was to re-interview the only witness, Sarah Hartsfield. She was brought to an interview room, still playing the part of the distraught girlfriend. She repeated her story about waking up to find Eduardo in distress. She spoke of his health issues, painting a picture of a man whose body had simply given out. But the detectives now had the doctor's report. They asked her about the puncture mark. They asked her about insulin. Her composure began to fray at the edges. She denied everything. She claimed to have no idea how the mark got there. She insisted she had no access to insulin. Her denials became more forceful, her story more convoluted. She was a trained liar, but under the pressure of direct evidence-based questioning, her performance began to fail. The most significant breakthrough, however, came from the initial 911 call itself. Detectives learned that it had been triggered by the Alexa device. This was a revelation. It meant there was a potential recording of the event. They also learned about the security camera in the bedroom. Suddenly, they had two potential digital witnesses that Sarah knew nothing about. Warrants were obtained immediately. Technicians from the sheriff's office, along with experts from Amazon and the camera company, were tasked with retrieving the data. As they waited for the digital evidence, the physical search of the house began in earnest. What the forensics team found at Eduardo Valseca's home told a story of desperate, calculated deception. The bedroom, which had appeared undisturbed to the initial responding deputies, was revealed to be a meticulously sanitized crime scene. Using luminol, a chemical that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin, investigators sprayed the room. Under the eerie blue glow, the truth of the struggle became visible. Blood spatter was revealed on the wall near the bed. Smears and wipe marks showed up on the floor, evidence of a frantic cleanup. Someone had tried to erase the violence that had taken place there. The search extended to the trash bins outside. Buried beneath the day's garbage, they found discarded cleaning supplies, paper towels with faint reddish-brown stains, and something else, a syringe, and a small vial of insulin, the kind used by diabetics. Neither Eduardo nor Sarah was diabetic. This physical evidence was damning. It proved that a violent struggle had occurred, that an attempt had been made to conceal it, and that the specific agent suspected by the doctors at the hospital had been present at the scene. But the most powerful evidence was yet to come. It was silent, stored on a server hundreds of miles away. The audio file from the Alexa was retrieved. It was a little over a minute long. Listening to it was, for the investigators, a chilling experience. It was like hearing a ghost. The recording began with the muffled sounds of a struggle. Then the unmistakable sound of Eduardo Valseca groaning in pain. He was not having a silent seizure. He was being attacked. Over his groans, Sarah Hartsfield's voice could be heard. It was not the voice of a panicked girlfriend trying to help. It was cold, sharp, and angry. She was quoted as saying things like, "Stop fighting it," and "It will just be easier if you stop." It was the voice of a killer trying to subdue a victim. The recording was an audio snapshot of a murder. It directly contradicted every word of the story she had told. Then came the video from the security camera. The device had been triggered by motion, and it captured the events immediately following the struggle. The footage showed Sarah moving around the room with a calm, methodical purpose. She could be seen wiping the floor. She could be seen changing the sheets on the bed. She checked on Eduardo's motionless body several times, not to render aid, but seemingly to check if he was still breathing. The footage was a silent film of her cover-up, a visual confirmation of her guilt and her shocking lack of remorse. While investigators were uncovering this mountain of evidence, the battle for Eduardo's life at the hospital was lost. After several hours on life support, his body gave out. Eduardo Valseca was pronounced dead. The official cause of death was determined by the medical examiner. It was not a seizure, not a stroke, not a heart attack. It was homicide, caused by a lethal overdose of insulin. The autopsy confirmed the presence of the drug in his system at levels far beyond anything that could occur naturally. It also documented bruising and other signs of a physical struggle, consistent with the sounds on the Alexa recording and the blood evidence found at the scene. The case against Sarah Hartsfield was now airtight. The story she had so carefully constructed had been completely demolished by a combination of old-fashioned detective work and the very modern technology she had overlooked in her own home. The trial of Sarah Hartsfield began nearly a year later. She sat at the defense table with the same calm, collected demeanor she had displayed during her first police interview. She maintained her innocence, her defense team arguing that Eduardo's death was a tragic accident, that he had somehow injected himself, or that the evidence was purely circumstantial. The prosecution, however, had a story to tell that was backed by undeniable fact. They laid out their case methodically, piece by piece, building a wall of evidence that was impossible for the defense to climb. They started with the first responders, who testified about Sarah's strangely calm behavior at the scene. They put the ER doctor on the stand, who explained the medical impossibility of her story and described his discovery of the needle mark. The forensic scientists followed, detailing the blood evidence, the cleaned-up crime scene, and the discovery of the syringe and insulin. But the emotional and factual core of the trial was the digital evidence. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as the prosecution played the Alexa recording. For 60 seconds, the jury, the judge, and Eduardo's grieving family listened to the final, horrifying moments of his life. They heard his pained groans. They heard the cold, cruel words of the woman sitting just feet away from them. It was a voice from the grave, and it was pointing directly at his killer. The lead detective testified, "In that recording, we don't hear a wife trying to save her husband. We hear a suspect attacking a victim." Next, they played the security camera footage. The jury watched the silent, chilling video of Sarah Hartsfield's cover-up. They saw her wiping away evidence while the man she claimed to love lay dying. Her actions on the screen were not those of a grieving partner in shock. They were the actions of a guilty person trying to get away with murder. The prosecution also brought in witnesses from Sarah's past. Another former partner took the stand and told a story that was eerily similar to Eduardo's. He spoke of her manipulative behavior, her financial demands, and a time he became mysteriously ill after she had prepared a meal for him. Her history of suspicious behavior painted a clear picture of a serial predator. Sarah's defense was weak. They tried to suggest that the Alexa could have been triggered at any time, that the sounds were misinterpreted. They argued that the security camera footage showed a woman in shock, cleaning compulsively as a trauma response. But these arguments crumbled under the weight of the combined evidence. After a 2-week trial, the jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. The courtroom was packed as the jury foreman handed the slip of paper to the bailiff. Eduardo's family held hands, their faces etched with anxiety and hope. Sarah Hartsfield stared straight ahead, her mask of composure finally beginning to crack. The verdict was read aloud. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. A wave of quiet relief and sorrow washed over the gallery. Eduardo's son, who had sat through every moment of the trial, broke down in tears, comforted by his grandparents. Justice, in this case, had been served. Sarah Hartsfield showed no emotion as she was handcuffed and led from the courtroom. She was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story of Eduardo Valseca's murder is a personal tragedy, a story of a good man's life stolen by a cold and calculating killer. It is a story about the profound grief of a family left to pick up the pieces, to raise a son who will now know his father only through memories and photographs. But his legacy is also a powerful, modern cautionary tale. It forces us to reconsider the technology we so readily welcome into our most private spaces. Devices like Alexa and home security cameras are marketed to us as tools of convenience and protection. They play our music. They turn on our lights. They watch over our homes when we are away. We invite them into our bedrooms, our living rooms, our kitchens. We trust them. But we rarely consider that these devices are always listening, always watching. They are impartial, unblinking witnesses. They do not interpret, they do not forget, and they do not lie. They simply record the truth of what happens in their presence. For Sarah Hartsfield, this was a fatal miscalculation. She was so focused on the human element of her deception, on fooling the police, the paramedics, and the doctors, that she completely ignored the non-human witnesses in the room. She was defeated by a smart speaker and a pet camera. This case serves as a stark reminder that in the 21st century, the walls truly do have ears. And sometimes those ears are connected to the cloud, storing evidence that can send a killer to prison for life. It is a chilling thought, but for Eduardo Valseca, it was the only thing that brought him justice. So what is the final warning here? It is not to fear technology. It is to be profoundly careful about the people you allow to get close to it. The most sophisticated security system in the world cannot protect you from a threat you willingly invite into your home. Pay attention to the people in your life. Look past the charming facade, the impressive resume, the convincing stories. Trust your instincts. The most dangerous monsters are not the ones who break down your door in the middle of the night. They are the ones who have a key. The house in Tijeras, New Mexico, is quiet now. The workshop where Eduardo Valseca once turned rough wood into art sits empty. But somewhere, on a secure server, a small audio file remains. It is a digital echo of a man's last moments, a testament to a crime that almost went unpunished, and a permanent record of the voice that saved him from being just another victim of a perfect murder.